Welcome to the Profitable Farmer podcast, where we share stories and tips to help you run a better farming business and create your very own freedom farm. If you're looking to work smarter and not harder in your farm business, welcome. You're in the right place. And hopefully this win that we're seeing here today is landing with you and helping things dry out a little bit, and hopefully your harvest and shearing and all of the busyness of the end of the season starts to get underway. What a year it's been. Like no other, I think it's fair to say. It gives me great pleasure in this podcast to welcome back Brett Stevenson to our podcast. I interviewed Brett in November 2020 to give us a read on the grain market and his view on the future of the grain market back then. And with this season that we've seen and with what's playing out globally, I just thought it perfect timing to call on Brett again, founder and managing director of Market Check, which is Australia's most prominent and independent marketing and education service to Australian farmers. Brett and his team have just such a strong level of capability in all things grain marketing. So it's wonderful, Brett, to have you with us again. Thanks for your time, and thanks for your read on what's played out for us and what is to play out for us in all that we're doing around grain commodities and harvest right now.
Thanks, Jeremy. Good to be with you and with all your supporters. So, it's been an interesting time.
So, Brett, let's go back to sort of February of this year. I'd love to understand, given that we had a fairly good, solid, wet start in most areas, like what was your read on the season ahead? And, what were your predictions then? And what is your take on this season that we've had?
Yeah, well, Jeremy, it's interesting. We're talking about November 20, and I probably would have said, gee, it's great to finally have a decent season, and let's hope we can get a couple more. Well, I suppose earlier this year, after two pretty strong seasons, to then go on for a third, it made me think about the drought, where we had 2 years of drought and thinking of going on to the third. And although the bit like two up, it doesn't mean just because there's been a stream of heads, there isn't going to be another head afterwards. It was a little bit hard to believe that we could head into another good go at a cropping season again. And then all that shaped by the background of, on the 24th of February, Russia going across the border into Ukraine. So we had this mixed thing of the season getting underway early, and on good time for most people, canola being able to go in the ground, and then having this massive volatility in the oilseeds markets, or all grain markets really, at the same time. But so early, all happening in March, time when you've had two seasons. You go, do I sell some forward or do I lock some in? Crikey, we're really going to have another good go at a season. So it was a really, difficult time to work out what to do with all this volatility that was available to us.
And what's your team's assessment of what we can expect now as we sort of come into a late harvest? No doubt at the start of the season, there was sort of big estimations around production levels across the country, but with, the extended wet that we've had, and this unique season that's unfolded, what are your estimations as a team now?
Well, it's been, I think, like I'm talking about volatility and the prices. Well, in the last couple of months, the forecasters that have been out there have been pretty volatile in they've gone, I think the highest Australian crop forecast for wheat got to 36.5 million tonnes. We're now probably moderating more to 34 or so, depending on which, taking a sort of balance of the forecasters that are out there. So the crop has been sort of meandering from 31 not many months ago to 36, back to 34. We're talking about millions of tons of movement in the total crop. So it's been an extraordinary finish, and it's sort of like I was saying there before that we sort of thought, gee, maybe it's going to be a dry one after two good wet ones, and it's actually been the reverse. We're getting flooded, and we've been getting flooded, and we're losing crops because of being too wet. And then it's the forecasters are trying to balance out, as are the farmers, how much impact is that going to have on my total crop? At low country getting flooded out, but hills looking better and better. So there's, there's so much uncertainty about what the impact is on the quality of the crop here now. I was just actually talking to you before the podcast we're just starting to get a feel from the north and some areas of South Australia, and even around here in the Riverina, just tidbits of crop coming in and getting a feel for what it's like. So, it's a big crop, but it's been very weather impacted, both from a good sense of growing capability, but also in terms of quality.
Yeah, and no doubt the challenges now start for our farmers, don't they, on how they practically get onto paddocks and get it off farm and into a grain market.
Yeah, well, there's difficulties there. I was just talking to, I've got a small sort of nursery thing on my farm here, and I had a couple of members of Market Check here on the weekend, and one was just telling me that her husband got out and was on the header trying to strip some canola, and she was waiting on the tractor, and he made one round. She thought, oh, gee, that's pretty good. Went into the second round and got bogged twice, had to pull him out twice. So that's just an indication of what it's going to be like. So that's going to be, a bit like it happened in a lot of areas last year. So it's going to be difficult to get off the paddock. And then once you get off the paddock, I don't think blind Freddie could not notice just how bad these roads are in a lot of areas. There's some roads actually out here, out past West Wyalong there, that have actually been closed because the road is so damaged beyond repair. So just getting it from the farm to a site, stored carefully, or trying to work out how you're going to store it on the farm, keep it out of any water. Logistics and that sort of thing, and just the sheer moving the grain is going to be very challenging for everybody. It's going to take a lot of thought to it, and it's going to be interesting to see how it all pans out, actually, Jeremy, to be honest.
Is it possible to do a state by state, or is there just so much variability within each state that a comment on what's happening in each of the states isn't relevant?
No, I think it is relevant, Jeremy, to be honest with you. Obviously New South Wales is, you sit here in the Riverina, and I was just telling you before, I've had 6 floods go in front of my office window here down on the Clamber Creek here, and more east, central west, you don't have to go too far. It's all the same. It's, so New South Wales is really the one that's really hurt the most. There's areas of Victoria that have had some flood impact, of course, from those storms, particularly from those storms about a month ago. But nothing like New South Wales. In South Australia, we've had some storms through there on the weekend. We're just in the latter part of November. And we're not quite sure of, I don't think too much damage, just damage to facilities. So New South Wales is the hotspot for the flood damage, really. So you certainly can't extrapolate what's happened here in New South Wales to Victoria and South Australia. They're in pretty good shape. And barring more bad weather catching up with them, which hopefully doesn't happen, we should have fairly smooth harvests in Victoria, South Australia, and we'll have a hodgepodge in New South Wales. Southern Queensland is going along quite well, and Western Australia, well, should come in pretty smoothly.
Right, great. I've heard really good reports coming out of Southern Queensland, and it's good just to understand what's happening over in WA as well. What does all that mean in your view, and what are you telling your clients from a pricing perspective, Brett?
Yeah, well, as I said, we're here we are in the sort of last week and a half of November. And and we're talking about just getting onto crops. Can you believe it? We're in the last sort of piece of November and we're just getting onto these crops. So what's happened is for a lot of consumers, domestic consumers, and also some of the exporters that have sold into the export market, they thought that, who wouldn't have thought that the crop would be coming in by now, really holus bolus, and you'd be able to accumulate stock and get it off down the logistics channels and start exporting it, and the consumers here domestically, same thing. And anyway, it hasn't happened. So they've run down stock, the domestic consumers, and it's got very tight. So what we're trying to do as best we can once we get with these crops is try and get grain moved and sold into those markets, because there's a big premium for early delivery, early sale of the grain that's coming off. Pretty much doesn't matter what it is, really. Canola, wheat, barley. There's all homes that are fairly short. So that's a pretty easy one if you can get it off the paddock, in the truck, on the road, and to where it's needed. But by the time we start getting into harvest and we get to know what it is, and it's starting to creep along that route now, we'll get to where there's enough grain to satisfy those short export demands, at the nearby shipments, and the consumers will start getting enough. The domestic consumers will get enough to get by until the bulk of harvest comes in, and then we'll get the real deal of where the prices are going to find themselves.
So you see a bit of a premium around that in the short term, and then prices probably coming off once those short-term shortages are fulfilled.
Yeah, so we're sort of yelling from the treetops a bit, Jeremy, to say because the temptation is, when it's such a difficult harvest, to concentrate purely on the headers, the trucks, the storage, and organising staff, and all that's been challenging enough. And just let's get the job done and not worry about the market. And we're saying, look, keep your eye out, because there's lots of opportunities here early on. So keep your ears on, because if you can just get it away and get it moved, get it into some of these early markets, there's 70, 80, even up to $100 a tonne premium over where the market sees itself being in a month's time. And that'll go for a little while depending on where you're located. So, we're just trying to really encourage people to watch the market early. Once we get into the thunder of harvest, of course, it'll be a different story. But anyone who's lucky enough to get on their country early, and get it moving, we're trying to keep them aware of what's going on.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thanks, Brett. What other risks and issues should we be aware of?
Well, the interesting thing is, I guess, with going back to what's happened this year with Russia invading Ukraine and the world's largest exporter of wheat and the fifth largest exporter of wheat in the world being locked into military combat, that we had this obviously explosion in the prices. And so we've seen, the ASX market for APW got up to $550, I think, dollars a tonne for wheat. And so we've got very much used to these high prices. And I guess as we dig further into harvest, it's coming at a time where the world is starting to moderate a little bit with the export market. And of course, most of the grain from Australia, is going to be exported. So that export market is starting to be, you got this short going on, which is confusing people a bit. Gosh, these big numbers for barley delivered now, wheat delivered now, and then to all of a sudden go, hang on, we get into the breadth of harvest and it's 80 or 90 lower all of a sudden. People need to understand that that's where the real export job is, if you like. And at the same time, all those issues that we've been dealing with during the year to do with Russia and Ukraine, up and down fighting, the corridor to be able to get wheat out of the Black Sea into the world market, being sort of closed off, opened. We'd had recently Putin closed it, and then within 2 days, open again. All these things are on people's minds. But what I'm trying to, I suppose, give the message here on this podcast is things are starting to settle. You know, we've just had the meeting with Biden and Xi Jinping. You know, the growth, average growth from 2000 to 2010 in China was at around 10% per annum. With the COVID restrictions and everything, we're looking at a forecast of less than 4 for this year. So they need their commodities. They need their food. Their economy is in a bit of trouble. Putin, for want of saying he's losing the war, but it's not going well, and closing that corridor, I think, was the last gasp for trying to get attention to get a deal. And that didn't last for a few days. And now that wheat is flowing. So I suppose what I'm just trying to say, Jeremy, the market is on a different footing to where it's been for the balance of the last 11 months of the year. And we just need to be mindful of that. I'm not wanting to say that things could fall away, and maybe they won't, but certainly what was going on in the world to generate these high prices doesn't seem, in our vision, to be as apparent as what it was. So, yeah, we're just trying to get people's head on about that, I suppose.
So on just to round that out, the unique events of the Ukraine and COVID have meant we've seen inflated prices, but they're not to be the base level. You see things stabilising a bit, and with that, probably prices stabilising as well.
Absolutely, and they've actually started to do that internationally. We're not seeing it. It has come back here in Australia a bit, I suppose, but we've got this short in the market that's making it look like it's not really there. But yeah, I mean the Chicago price per bushel, so in US dollars, has been up, $10, $12 a bushel. I mean, we're trading close to 8 now, just to give people an idea. We're at the lowest point we've been for some time. And international prices in Australian dollars per tonne are probably the lowest they've been for some time as well. So, yeah, things are really calming down, that's for sure.
Brett, what's happened in other major grain export nations this season? Canada, America and other, and what are the other sort of global influences that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, so it's a really good point, Jeremy, because what we need now is, I think we're out of bullets for warfare, coming to the rescue to climb prices up again. I think. I mean, who knows? I didn't think Russia would invade Ukraine, so I got that wrong. Our correspondents in Ukraine and Russia didn't think that they would, but they did. So maybe something can happen. But I think the real thing for us now to keep these prices up here while we can market our crop is going to be these crops overseas. Now, the US is dry, but we're heading into the winter over there. So, they've been getting some precipitation, which has sort of taken a bit of the oomph out of it. The Argentinian crop is very dry, which is going to come off February next year, which will be, sort of the next supplier. So that's helpful, and not looking good at this stage. But the other big bangers like Russia, Ukraine hasn't got as much crop in, so that's helpful. Russia is going extremely well, and Europe is going quite well at this stage too. So, but if North America could come out of this into the spring, early next year, and remain dry, and Argentina doesn't improve, it might provide that bit of underpinning in the supply side, which could keep these prices here. So, yes, the political scene is moderating, so we probably can't. It's a bit hard to look for that to fire up again. But certainly the production side of things has the potential to help us.
And is that consistent across all the commodities that you work in, Brett? I mean, that's obviously, that speaks to the cereals and to the oil seeds and maybe the pulses.
The oil seeds, not quite as much. The pulses, Canada is starting to get a bit of a reprieve in parts. So the pulses, I'll probably need to dig deeper to give a more definitive answer. But let's say oil seeds, which is easier. The big producers like Brazil and that sort of thing are still looking reasonably on target. There is a lot of soybean grown in Argentina, but it's not as tight as it was, but still not too badly off. Europe is travelling quite well, as I said. We've got a big crop of canola coming off, which is going to keep things reasonably moderated as well, even though soybeans are the biggie. Probably say from a production point of view, you can't get too carried away with looking for a production problem there. But the market is globally still tight on oilseeds, so it should hold pretty well. And that's been sort of justified here, as you can see, the market holding around this 850, 800 sort of mark, which is, still incredible. I mean, really, compared to where we've been over the last 10 years. So, the wheat and the cereals is the one that's probably got the more chance for being supported by seasonal conditions.
And do you see anything special in the price range based on quality?
Well, I mean, that's, with what's happening here, with the weather, and we were talking briefly before about the shape of the crop as it comes in. By that, I mean, the quality framework that we're going to see. We're probably going to see the largest spread of quality dynamics more as evenly as it's going to be that we've seen before. In other words, instead of there being a bit of, feed and a lot of APW and H2 and that sort of thing, I think we're going to see a fairly even spread of stuff from H1 all the way right down to feed, over the New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. So there's going to be a fairly big spread of quality. And of course, the protein is very, very well sought after. So that's got some big premiums there. Malt barley, 100 over feed barley. If we've got a client with some malt barley in Moree, so very happy we're getting that away as fast as we can. But even still, you get down to SFW and feed wheat, they're still worth pretty strong money, at the moment, 300s and this sort of thing. So there's some big premiums and discounts in there, but still, even if you've got a fair bit of feed wheat or SFW, they've still got pretty strong, strong values to support them at the minute. And we've got strong demand out of Southeast Asia for a lot of those grades into the feeders. So they're hanging in there pretty well, considering how wet this year has been.
With that, I think the other thing that's unique about this year is we've seen some inflationary impact post-COVID, fuel, fertiliser. A lot of us haven't been able to get on our paddocks, so we've called on helicopters and aeroplanes to spray or spread fertiliser. I think it's fair to say that a lot of people are optimistic going into this year and have thrown the book at some of these crops. What advice are you giving to people who are sort of navigating that higher cost base and really looking to get as much from their marketing as they can?
Well, there's a big dynamic going on in that whole environment. Yes, it's been the most expensive crop in history, as you're mentioning. There's no walking away from that. And of course, the values have led to that investment because what's been going on in the markets has really rewarded you. And, even the hay market's a bit short because everyone's going on to seed because of the value that's there. The thing is to be, and I might just put this into some context, is at the same time we want to get the crop secure. So, and with the weather, that's getting a priority, of course. But as I'm sort of saying, the markets are starting to moderate. The global political scheme is starting to moderate. Yes, we've got some support from production issues, but we've got the background of taxation problems a bit there. I'm not a tax specialist, but I know we've had two very good crops, a lot of money pouring into the P&Ls of the farms, and to the point where it's been a lot of new equipment bought to depreciate to try and offset a lot of that. And so there's probably a temptation. Can I hang on to a bit of this for a period? Cost me a lot to get this crop in the bin, but can I hang on to maybe after 30th of June? But, there's a lot of uncertainty and things are not as fired up as they were last year. So, look, it's complicated, Jeremy.
That's insightful. That's insightful. If you are, looking at deferring income for tax purposes or other, just check that thought process, I guess, is what you're saying.
Yeah, well, you certainly don't want to try and do that and hold on to past 30th of June at the expense that Northern Hemisphere crop comes in okay, and we start getting into May next year and the spring goes all right in North America particularly, and Europe's travelling along okay. I don't want to be a soothsayer, but we could go back to where we were. Prices could go back to where we were, and for a lot of people who have had to put this crop in twice because of how wet it's been, it could really catch you out.
With that, I think it's just really important as a reminder, guys, to be out making sure you're right on top of your cash flow forecast into the future, and that you're modelling actively those various scenarios around this harvest and what it can mean for future seasons. I think that's really important to be on top of beyond this conversation. Brett, given that and that stability in the global market that you're starting to sense, do you have an outlook beyond this season and for the next year or two?
Yeah, what we think that just the good thing about COVID is, even though it's sort of, apart from in China where it's still causing a lot of problems, is that it has, it feels like it's backed up a lot of demand. Like that's why the inflation is appearing. There's a lot of coiled up spring demand out there in these economies now, trying to be controlled by the central banks, and who knows where that goes, whether they overdo it or not. But that's been helping the demand side of things, oils in particular. So at the same time, the balance sheets, the amount of stock available with what's happened with Black Sea has become very tight in all the exporter nations because they've had to use up a lot of those stocks out of those exporter nations. So, our view is that the market should hold for a reasonable period. There's lots of uncertainty with that new crop to hold things reasonably within a reasonable price framework. But if we get into that Northern Hemisphere spring and we don't get dry conditions, we come back into a more average crop in North America. Because just remember, the Southern Hemisphere only represents a fairly small piece of the supply framework for the world. The big Russia, Ukraine's, Europe, and North America are the big suppliers. So unless you can create a big hiccup up there, which we've had, North America's had some pretty ordinary seasons, and so has Canada, but if they were to get back to more normal, then you've got to accept that the prices are going to come back, maybe not to where they were before. Maybe we're not saying, $200 a tonne or anything like that, but maybe 250 to 300 for APW, is something that we could get to. So, and that's a fair way. ASX trading right at the minute, at 445. So there's no silver bullet out there for farmers to say these prices have to be between sort of 350 and 450 if the security scene in terms of Russia, China starts settling and the crops start flowing back to sort of the Northern Hemisphere crops start flowing back to somewhat of average, then we've got to accept that we've got to probably come back a fair way from where we are. So, and I guess 27 years of doing this, Jeremy, you sort of know that, things tend to sort of roll around the averages, good crops, bad crops. And we get the worst of it here in Australia. We get thundering droughts, then we get these bloody big floods and stuff. But in North America and Europe, they just don't get those big swings. Yes, they are getting a down crop at the moment, but they just as soon as they're down, they've had a couple of years of pretty poor crops, they'll end up with a stronger crop, and we'll be back to more of an average type price scenario.
Yeah, it's a really important point, Brett, that it's easy when we do our forecasts at the start of these years to be really bullish around the price we put into our budgets that we go to the banks with. I think to your point, we're in a cyclical game, and there's nothing to say that we won't move sort of significantly back towards average prices over the next year or two. So just make sure that we're thinking about those next few seasons with that in mind.
Yeah, that's right. And, that just sort of leads into the whole, people can make their own choices, but with inputs, and they're very, very expensive. But if the prices come back a bit, people probably won't be going as hard. Like at the moment, the world is saying we're short of stock, particularly without Ukraine in. We need to make it so the farmers that can are buying a lot of inputs to get these crops in. They're pushing the prices up. But if that was to sort of, Ukraine was to get back more to normal, in the next crop, because they're about 60 or 70% in this year, US was to have a better season, then that would come down. So it's, I actually said earlier this year, Jeremy, when I was traveling around seeing our members and stuff, saying, sort of worries me that these inputs are so high because it feels like it could be a sucker crop. In other words, sucks you into the high prices, and you just keep going at it because you want to get those high prices. You spend a lot on the crop and then get to the end and go, bugger it, but it hasn't sort of happened. The crop's turned out okay. But is next year that crop? Is that next year the one that's going to suck us into spending a lot on it? But then the returns, it's probably got to happen somewhere, but which year is the one?
I wanted to ask you, Brad, as you travel around and you do and see a lot of farms over the last 10 or 15 years, how big a shift toward cropping have you seen as a general comment? And do you see that changing if we are going to swing back to closer to average prices perhaps and have to navigate inflation? Do you think we might see some sort of adjustment back to more of a mixed farming model? Like, what's your view on what has happened and what might happen?
No, it's interesting, and I'd definitely swing to broadacre and finding more country. Like I was flabbergasted to see the country between. I drove across from Clare Valley to Mildura about 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago, and admittedly it's a great season, but I was just amazed at how much cropping is going on up in that top corner of South Australia and of Victoria as well, which I hadn't realised had been happening. So yeah, there's and that was probably old sheep country really. I don't see it swinging back too much, Jeremy, because at the end of the day, you have to make such a big investment now to get all your economies right, the right equipment, the technology right, and it's a brain matter thing too. These are complicated, crops, GPS, all this sort of stuff. A lot of big decisions around the agronomy management of these crops, and so that's what's kept the actual livestock markets quite firm, in my view. Is that a lot of guys, even though sheep prices are good and cattle are good, grain is good too, and maybe it's brought a lot of people into grain away from those livestock industries, but I think the ones that have got that lucky balance of the mixed farming, that live in the right areas for that, they're certainly not going to shift to farming, absolute. But the ones that have gone to absolute farming, I probably can't see, from our client base point of view, can't see too much shifting back into livestock. But maybe I'm talking my own book, Jeremy, because you're in the grain business, so.
We're big advocates to picking one or two and really doing them well, rather than trying to do 3 or 4 or 5 enterprises. And so, I think there's proof to say that if you're best practice in whatever industry you're participating in, you can still do very well. So I think, people who are committing to cropping are in pursuit of being at the top of the class, aren't they, in that vocation? They're not necessarily going to change quickly away from that business model because of what we've talked about. I think your comment's spot on. What excites you on farm? You think about those people who've gone all in on cropping and they're doing it very well. What excites you about what you've seen come into the industry from a production perspective as you travel around, Brett?
Well, I suppose I've been very taken with the ability for people to farm some areas which I would have said when I first started 26 odd years ago, were not farmable. Like you couldn't grow crops in those areas. So, I was so taken with the fact that guys have been brave enough and have got enough technology around them in terms of moisture management and stuff to crop some of these areas that I would have thought were uncroppable, frankly. So that's been, for me this year, that's probably been one of the most exciting things I've seen, is to see those areas, obviously having a big banger crop too, but to see them able to farm those areas the way they are, and they're going to do well. Good on them. Outside of that, I suppose, one of the things, I guess it's a challenge, but it'd be exciting to see a lot more improvement. I might just focus on South Australia on this, but is to see much better and more efficient ability to move grain in Australia. What I sort of see, Jeremy, is that I've seen the farmers kept up with the technology, GPS, better economies of scale, better equipment. We're really at, global standard in terms of keeping up with the way that we're running our production stuff. But sadly, the logistics in terms of exporting these crops, rail, port infrastructure and stuff has really not travelled that same road. It's been very static, like it really not much has happened. And so we're growing these 35, 34 million tonne crops. In Western Australia is doing a great job. They're getting theirs out well. But in Eastern Australia, we've just got a lot more to do. So another thing that excites me is down in South Australia is seeing some of these new ports that are being built, and new structures of loading boats that then go out and load the bigger vessels out in the harbour, out in the bay, in the Gulf. And it excites me to see, I don't know what, we'll have to see what the impact is, to see this just out of Bowman here, watching the Inland Rail coming in. So, I suppose I'm getting to the end of my career, but it would be great to see all that infrastructure catch up with the farmer with what they're doing, because, we've got, as I said, we're keeping up. The farmers are doing a great job keeping up with the global, standard, if not at the very top of it. But all our movement capability has not kept up.
So, Brett, it's really interesting to hear your comments on the local infrastructure and that needing to keep up. I guess the one other thing that comes to mind is in this season where there's going to be such diversity in quality, I wonder how our limited infrastructure is going to hold up to that. And also, I guess, the complexity of decisions for the farmer, like how do I get across my best marketing option for my produce this year when there is going to be so much variability?
Yeah, well, Jeremy, that like price discovery in my world, I guess, is a real issue. We've got a market that's still very disparate. We've got a lot of growers who are trying to find the buyer themselves. We've got platforms out there that are trying to use electronic ways of discovering the market, but they're not the Google, they're the Yahoo or the other types of search engines. They've not fully supported. So there is a real issue with actual price discovery in Australia. Again, I'd probably say because we deregulated in 2008, we're still on the path of finding that really good way of discovering price. So we put a lot of energy and effort into that. We've got we use a platform where we've got tenders and things like that to try and discover where the market really is, because a lot of people seem to think the market is where the buyer wants to buy, and that's not where the market is. The market is what the buyer's willing to pay. And that can only be discovered if you've got a system where they're bidding a price, the grower's offering it a price, and somewhere there's a navigation in the middle. So, but unfortunately, our market tends to work at harvest time where the grower just gets the grain and goes bang, hits the bid all the time, and the bid price tends to be the market. I'd really like it to see a lot more growers offering grain and discovering where the market will trade rather than thinking that wherever the buyer's bidding is where the market is. So I know that's probably a little bit complex, but that's a really important piece to the puzzle coming forward for the grain industry, I reckon.
Yeah, it's really interesting insight. How does market check play in that? And I'm just keen for you to give your team a plug while we can.
Well, the buyers don't like us very much because we don't like hitting bids, right? We like to offer grain. We like to try and work out where we think the market should trade and offer it at those levels, which means the buyer has to pay what we believe is the right value for the grain. So and we do that through a lot of structures. We have a big offer board we use, and we use the tender structures and things like that, where we've got 700, 800 odd buyers, 740 odd buyers on those platforms that are watching it all the time. So differently to, say, a broker, for instance, who's really looking for bids and then feeding you into the bid. We don't do that. And naturally, the buyers love those brokers who do that because they give them their bid and bang, a grower selling to them, whereas we don't do that. So it's sometimes people can see that as a bit more tedious because we're working the grain, not just selling it. And it's something different about the way Market Check works in that space.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. Hey, if you'd allow me, I want to change direction a little bit. Over my last few podcasts, I've really focused in on this topic of resilience. I've spoken to a neuroscientist and psychologist, our head coach. I've shared a bit of my backstory, and we've done an interview with Troy and Nettie and Westy just to reflect on recovering from adversity of the Pinery and KI fires. I think it's been a really interesting series. Brett, you've had your own experience of real adversity in your life, living life now as a quadriplegic after an accident at the beach years ago, and you've managed to grow a really successful business in spite of that, which is just an absolute credit to you. We touched on this story 2 years ago when I interviewed you the first time. Would you mind sharing a bit of that journey again, perhaps? But I'm keen for your spin on resilience. Like, what is it that you would say helps individuals navigate that sort of a challenge and still be resilient?
Jeremy, it's a really interesting topic. I talk about it a lot, I guess, within the spinal cord injuries sort of group of people. I often have people who have just had a spinal injury. They'll ring for me to come and see their partner or whoever it might be that's in hospital and that sort of thing. And I guess I've seen, I've witnessed a lot of different types of resilience, like good resilience, ability to move on and get on with your life, even though you've had a tragedy that's happened to you. And I've also seen a complete collapse of people as well, people that just completely fall apart. So, and what is it? What is the difference between those that can get through it and move on and those that just fall in a heap? And when I say fall in a heap, I mean, falling in a heap and just disappearing, and I think, for me, for me, a lot of it is around some luck, and when I say luck, I mean luck in the fact that I've got a great family around me. So having family when you have a tragedy is such a big deal. And that family can be just the friends you have, doesn't necessarily mean a wife and children or a husband and children. It's about having those people around you. And some people invest in those people, some people don't. But I'd say when you do invest in those people and something goes wrong, it's a really powerful thing to have them in your camp. So I've been very fortunate to have those people in my camp, in my team, if you like. And the other thing I've been, very glad to have had is just this industry, being involved in agriculture. I was involved in the banking industry in the first 10 years of my career. And I don't know, I just didn't feel there was a lot of value I was bringing in that. But, I don't know, there's something about just helping in agriculture, helping farmers, helping try and improve their businesses, all that sort of thing. For me, has given me something to really focus on, and so the say pile of depression and say, righto, no, I'm here to do a job, and there's people who need what I've got in my head, and I can focus on that. And at the end of the day, I can feel good about what I'm doing, and that has helped me personally a lot with my journey of dealing with what's happened to me. So yeah, a lot of people sort of say, "Oh, can you talk to this person and get them all better?" And I can do that to a certain extent, but boy, oh boy, it makes a big help if you've got this, the team Stevenson or whoever it might be around you, and if you're lucky enough to be in an industry which is really providing value for people, and you can feel good about what you're doing, and just means, I'm doing something really good here. I need to keep moving forward.
I really appreciate your openness and your comments, Brett. I think it's important for our listeners and our farmers also to realise that what you're doing day in, day out, even for its challenges, it's actually really important work. You're feeding the nation and you're feeding the globe, and your part in that's important. With people who are going through their own version of adversity this season, and it might be related to the weather or it might be related to something else, Brett, have you got any tips or comments for them?
Well, it's a glass half full, glass half empty situation, isn't it, Jeremy? Like I've just got my little place here, and we've had 6 floods through here for the year, and so I had 3 years of drought, now three wet years, this one. And just about anything we do just seems to get we're trying to get pastures established, and now they're underwater. Anyway, so I sort of get it, what it's like to try and to spend a whole year tendering to a crop for it only to be underwater, and it's very disheartening. But the upside to that is, next year we're going to have all this subsoil moisture, so. And I know it's a game, you're playing with your head, but you're focusing on the positive aspects to try and get the glass half full rather than the glass half empty, to motivate yourself to say, yep, okay, got to make decisions. We've got to move this crop out. It's buggered. And we've got to start preparing because we've got this subsoil moisture trapped. So we're going to, we might have a crack at a summer crop or just keep defending it for the winter crop. And Jesus, isn't it a great start to have all that moisture there? Like things like that, I suppose. Other than and trying to build your own story to support yourself. It's a funny game to play, but I think it really helps to do that. I'm lucky because I've got all this moisture, I'm lucky because I've got a great team around me on the farm. I'm lucky because I'm well organised or whatever it is, rather than going, I'm bloody unlucky because this floodwater's destroyed everything. It's that sort of. And although it seems silly, it does help you. It does help you to focus on those positive things, and not let too many of the, for me, I can't walk anymore. Don't focus on that. Focus on what, the things that I can do and the positive things that I can do. Don't get caught up. Doesn't mean you're not going to have down times where you think of those things, and because nobody can avoid it, but just try and make sure there's more of the positive than there is the negative.
Yeah, wonderful comment. Couple of things just to add to that. I think we can't choose the events that come our way, but we can choose the attitude with which we navigate them, to your point, and to look for the silver lining and look for those little positives in a big negative or other. is really important. I think the other thing that you raised that's a really important point is that our result is not our identity. Like, just because we might have a result this year that we weren't expecting or hoping for, that doesn't define who we are. So we need to separate the results we get from who we are and really work on our own sense of self in addition to the result that we get. And you talk there about writing a better story. I think that's a really compelling way to put it, is that we get to choose the story that we tell ourselves about our reality, don't we? And we can always stop and be more accurate in how we define a better and more positive story.
Yeah, Jeremy, the thing is, you can get advice from people, they can try what they might, but unless you can sell yourself that story and believe in it yourself, then that's really, for me at least, that's been really important to be able to do that. And because advice is advice, but at the end of the day, you've got to have your own self-belief about what you're doing and putting a positive spin, just selecting the positive things and trying to shed the ones that are the negative things. And you're right, like there's people up around Moree and various other places, even out here on the Bland, that they're very good farmers, done everything right, everything they possibly could, but are going to have a terrible result this year. Nothing they could do. It's just God's way with the weather. But there's nothing to be reflected upon their ability. It's just how it goes, and frankly, in a way, that's life, Well,
it's the game we're in, but just somehow finding a way to take a higher perspective is really important, isn't it? And see this just as one season in 100.
Yeah.
And we need to dust ourselves off from this one. And as you say, look for the brightness in it for next year, perhaps.
Yeah, no, there is. Look, it's going to be out of this year. And pretty much people are saying about it already, is that we're going to have a great go at it next year because we're going to have all this moisture in the ground. And that's very true. It's very true. And the prices are, and let's hope they continue to hold. Prices are encouraging. And so it's a good time to be in agriculture. There's nothing really negative in agriculture at the moment. It's a very powerful time to be here. We're very lucky to be in an industry that's really doing as well as it is. It's really quite unbelievable what's going on in agriculture at the moment.
Even in this moment with the season that we have, I just do not think there's a better industry to be in.
No, I think we're contributing fantastically, and everyone should be able to puff their chest out and feel pretty good about what they're doing.
Brett, it's always a real privilege and a pleasure to catch up with you. I hope that we get to do this before 2 years from now. But thank you for sharing your local and global insight, but also just touching on your personal story and giving us your spin on navigating adversity and remaining resilient. Just a fantastic conversation. I'm very grateful for your time.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's been really nice to see you again. And let's make it less than 2 years next time.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time, Brett.
All right, no problem. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Profitable Farmer podcast by Farm Owners Academy. If you're new to this show, be sure to follow us. If you've been a long-time listener, let your friends know about us or come continue the conversation in the Profitable Farmer Facebook group. All the best as you grow your business and create your freedom farm. Until next time, keep being incredible.